الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على المصطفى وعلى آله وأصحابه وعلى من اتبع الهدى أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Yeah, Jazakallah. I do apologize. I've had two sessions before that and I just need a bit of a break. That's why. So that's why 10 minutes, because it's hard to teach three sessions back to back without a break. It's a bit difficult. So that's why I had to have that break. Okay. Uh, Okay, does anybody have a question? There's somebody's Nihar has raised their hands. Do you have a question you need to ask? So if you do, please make it quick, if you don't mind. Please speak in Urdu. The session's actually in English. I'm afraid. I'm not sure if you were aware, but this is actually a takhasus course in English. I can speak Urdu, it's just that majority of people are here, participants are in English. Okay, before we begin, so today we're going to be discussing the juristic hierarchy. So today we're going to be discussing the methodology and application, and these are the things we'll be discussing. The juristic hierarchy, how the Mufti deals with cases, Usul, Qawa'id al-Furu, general fatwa process, preparing a fatwa, and case example of how to break down a case of how to break down a query. So it's supposed to be query, not text. Sorry, my mistake. A query. Right, sorry, my mistake. Supposed to be a query. Before I begin, I wanted to ask everyone that did you all manage to read my article on the autistic husband's divorce? Did everybody get a chance here to read my article on the autistic husbands and divorce? No? Okay. Nihar, your hand is still up. If you have a question, please ask a question. Otherwise, if you could just remove it, okay? Jazakallah. Keep your hand down, okay? So please keep an eye on your the emoji, okay? Because it just creates confusion. Right. Okay. For those of you who managed to read it, what's your is there any way, if I can ask the panelists, if there's any way that if you can allow the participants to unmute their mic so that they can ask questions, because as I mentioned that there will be some interactive case studies they need to understand, okay? Can you post it on WhatsApp again? No, it was already posted on WhatsApp. This is your first session. Okay. Okay, for those of you who actually read it, what was your feedback on this? What did you think? Okay, so in terms of the um so in terms of the thing, I wasn't expecting you all to do like a detailed dive reading. What the purpose of this exercise was, to give you a bit of an insight in how a mufti needs to deal with contemporary and modern cases, right? Jawad, you got something to say? Anything you would like to share?
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
GS.
So maybe I can share some thoughts about
Yeah,
the article.
please do.
Maybe you can tell me if this is the right way to approach. So I think from the way mashallah is very well written and very interesting as well, case as well, where I think the approach or the framework was that initially looking at of the person having taklif, like making, looking at in which the person would have like the sound and complete intellect, and then going into the approach of 𝗪𝗪 and 𝗪𝗪 to assess how the person's capacity is, because the case is about autistic husband and divorce, right? So if the first assessing about the like general framework of what's ahliya, like how does a person have capacity, what rights and obligation the person has, and then when they execute certain acts or they say certain things, where do they stand from that perspective at that time? And I think it was like concluded about that the patient was ma'tu, like there's a impairment or there's a some impairment in mind, but not entirely, like the person is not entirely majnoon. I think you approached it from that perspective and discussed about like capacity. And I thought it's pretty interesting because in the sense that often when we assess capacity, it's usually something specific and at the moment, and not something generalized. So because if someone has autism, it's not that because of this autism, you cannot generalize and say that the person is incompetent or doesn't have entire ahliya, but it's about the situation because things fluctuate. So I think that divorce was pronounced during moments where they have emotional dysregulation and outbursts, and at that time, it was deemed that he did not have capacity. So that's just a short briefing of. I know it's a longer article and much more detailed, but just trying to understand.
MashaAllah, that's a very good summary. That is, MashaAllah, very good, excellent. I think that was, MashaAllah, very good. I think one of the things to mention, the challenges is that, first of all, to my knowledge, I don't think there was any, I've not come across any detailed fatwa article or any article like on the fatwa level that goes into this depth of research in regards to how do we deal with deal with these cases, right? You'll find most fatwas, what they do, they just provide generic answers and that's it. To specific cases, but just generic answers. Now, although many fatwas you'll find that they provide answers to specific cases, but there are a lot of nuances. Many of the fatwas, what they've done is that they're more concerned about application, the legal of the legal ruling without understanding an entire, without understanding the subject itself. And number two, without, and what they do is lack presenting a legal framework of how we approach these issues. Okay. So, which is why this is something I've always been on this view, and I do stand by this, and I do say that, fatwa methodologies are changing now. Okay, fatwa methodologies are changing. Is because of the change of the circumstances, because we have more access to new knowledge now, more information. We have now Muslims who are now specializing in specific areas, and they are able to combine both the contemporary knowledge as well as Islamic knowledge. Okay, nowadays you get certain people, they're not necessarily traditional alims or scholars, but Muslims, but because they have studied an area for so long, for many, many years, um, both from the academic side as well as from the Islamic perspective, okay, they are able to respond and be able to academically engage with the subject than a normal alim who's only specifically focused on the kitabs but not aware of the new knowledge and awareness around it. Okay. And when it comes to approaching these, so the fatwa article, it was mainly about understanding of how a mufti needs to approach these new cases. So rather than just giving a specific answer, yes or no, and just present a few ibarats, right? Present someone like a framework, okay? And a procedural methodological process in how we deal with these issues. So we have to go right back to the usul. We have to look at the furu, any relevant qawa'id that's applicable. And then, like you mentioned, is now you have to apply that in a specific case. So as a case study of an autistic husband's divorce. So theory and application, looking at the theoretical discussion and its application and its relevance to that particular case. And that is then usually a true measure of how well that scholar, generally speaking, is a true measure for a student when you're doing this, when you're presenting articles, research like this, it's then a true measure of how well you've understood your usul and qawa'id. Because otherwise, all of the usul and qawa'id are taught as theory, but they're not taught as application. And the only way you'll be able to apply it is if you take a contemporary case. Okay? Anyways, so that was that. So now what we're going to be doing is that because in this session we'll be focusing on the methodology and its application, we need to first understand the juristic hierarchy, how a mufti deals with cases. We're going to have a case with that, but before that, we need to understand a mujtahid. Who is a mujtahid? How is ijtihad applied? What are the classical hierarchical jurists? And is a mufti, when he's given a fatwa, is he actually practicing ijtihad or not, or is just a mere transmitter? So understanding the juristic status of modern day muftis. Okay, so first understand a mujtahid. What is a mujtahid? Someone who encompasses the knowledge of the Quran and its meaning, the knowledge of the Sunnah and its chain, text, and multiple meanings, knows the correct way of applying qiyas, also the knowledge of people's customs. All right. Now, ijtihad, the definition of ijtihad, there are about 10 different definitions, but they all boil down to a few things. Number one, a mujtahid is someone that who applies his own intellectual reasoning. Okay, intellectual reasoning. Number two, it's someone that who encompasses ihata. He encompasses the knowledge of the Quran and its meaning. So in other words, he has the knowledge of the Quran and the sciences related to the tafsir of the Quran. Number two, he has the knowledge of the Sunnah and the knowledge of the science pertaining to the Sunnah. For example, the chain of narration, the text, the multiple meanings, and so on. A mujtahid also is aware of, when say multiple meanings, in other words, the ikhtilaf in regards to the meaning of the verses of the Quran as well as the hadith. Okay? Likewise, he is very experienced in knowing how to apply qiyas. Okay? Qiyas, analogy, which is something that you're already familiar with. And he's familiar with people's customs. It's very important, essential that for a mujtahid that he's be very familiar with people's customs. So if you're not familiar with people's customs, right, then you can be guilty of wrong application. Yeah. Okay, right. So mujtahid versus a modern day mufti. Okay, mujtahid versus modern day mufti. So mujtahid, he's an independent thinker, right? He's an independent thinker. Number two, he just uses Sharia laws directly from the sources. Okay. So in other words, what he does, that he goes directly to the sources, to the Quran and the Sunnah, goes to the ijma, and he's able to independently apply a qiyas in order to reach to a conclusion, right? A mujtahid also systemizes a legal framework. So you know the usul fiqh, we have the usul, right? Okay. It is the mujtahid within the madhab, or the mujtahid, independent mujtahid, is the one who sets the legal framework. Because you have to have a legal framework and legal methodology when you're deriving rulings. Deriving ruling is not just arbitrary, you just decide how you want to decide to interpret a ruling. There's a legal framework, there's a legal methodology. So, the fatwa that I wrote, it was just to demonstrate um, a legal methodology that mujtahids applied in order to come to arrive to a ruling. And what we do is we just follow the methodology, that's it. Okay? And an affiliated mujtahid basically is a mujtahid that who they do apply the independent reasoning. They're able to apply the independent reasoning, but is within a limited framework. Basically, they follow the methodology of the teachers, or they follow the methodology of the school, right? An affiliated mujtahid adopts the senior mujtahid methodology, but can apply independent reasoning within the school themselves. One of the common examples is Imam Tahawi. Imam Tahawi, rahimahullah, who was a great jurist. He was a Hanafi scholar. He was a Hanafi mujtahid, but he reached to a level of ijtihad that where he was able to apply his own independent reasoning within the madhab itself. Okay. So this is what a mujtahid does. So a mujtahid, primarily he's an independent thinker. He applies his own legal reasoning. He's able to go directly to the sources of and extrapolate rulings. And they either set the framework, the legal methodological framework, or they redesign and they develop and they refine that legal framework, what we call usul fiqh. A mufti, on the other hand, right? Muftis of modern days. Number one, we're muqallids. Most of the muftis, in fact, all muftis, we operate within the madhab. We are muqallids, we're not independent thinkers. Okay. Number two, transmits and applies classical rulings to modern day context. So what modern day muftis do, we don't directly go to the Quran and the Sunnah anymore. Why do we do that? Is because the mujtahid imams have already done that for us. What we do is that because you have to remember, when we say we're muqallids, we rely on the research and the framework that the early mujtahid precedents have set for us. What we do is we take those, a mufti, he studies that, he understands them well, and he transmits and applies those classical legal rulings and those frameworks to modern day context. So when I was writing my article, when it came to these questions about ahli ada naqis, so it's not something that a mufti devises himself, but those are the earliest scholars who have already put these classifications of the ahliya, the qualification, which in other words, a person who's mukallaf, he has to be ahliya ada al-qabil al-naqis. So what we do, we take that framework, we expand on it, we explore it, and then we apply that to modern day context. So what happened was that, so in that case, in the autistic husband, I concluded that in that particular moment, he had ahliyat ada naqis. Okay, ada naqis. So his ahliyah at that time was naqis, was deficient, and someone who's deficient, then his divorce is not applicable, right? Like a majnoon and ma'tu, for example. Okay, right? So we take those framework and we apply it in that particular context. So it applies micro level ijtihad in specific cases. Now, I've used the term micro level because we have two extremes. There's one extreme that say that muftis are not mujtahids at all. They don't apply ijtihad. They are purely transmitters. They do naqal, 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 and that's it. Which gives the impression that we just transmit rulings without having to comprehend the rulings. Yes? And on the other hand, many people say that you can only be a mufti if you're a mujtahid. If you're not mujtahid, if you don't reach the level of ijtihad, you cannot pass fatwas and legal rulings. That's another extreme. That's not the case. You don't have to be a mujtahid in order for you to qualify as a mufti to pass legal rulings, okay? But what there is, and I see this as a balance, but because there are so many new legal cases now, there's so many cases which are unprecedented, how are we going to be dealing with those? So you have to apply some element of independent reasoning, ijtihad, but in specific cases, in order to come to a legal ruling. So muftis, it is possible that they do apply ijtihad in modern cases, but it's on a micro level. In other words, on specific cases only, okay? And adheres to the madhab's legal framework. So in other words, that what mufti does when even if he's applying transmitting rulings or is applying micro level ijtihad in specific cases, like Mufti Taqi Usmani in fiqh al-buyu, in his in the fiqh of Islamic finance, for example, you can say that he's applying micro level ijtihad in specific cases. He adheres to the madhab's legal framework. They adhere to the madhab legal framework. A faqih and learned in his own madhab. A mufti must be a faqih and he has to be learned in his own madhab. A mufti, even if he's a muqallid, just by graduating from the mufti course, does not qualify him to give fatwa straight away without him having experience and in-depth understanding, in-depth experience and knowledge and fiqh within his own madhab itself. Because if they lack that, they can't give fatwas, even if they're doing the mufti course, right? We'll talk about that. Now, this should clarify everything for you. If our participants who have joined today's session kindly review the recordings, okay, that's fine. Taking no worries. Yeah, that was, I suppose that's for you guys. Okay, the hierarchical juristic table. Now, this is something that I will explore in much more detail when I teach you Usul Iftā wa Adabuhu. So this is something that's going to be covered anyway, right? But just to make yourself familiar at the moment, don't worry if you don't understand this completely. This will be explained and discussed when you start the Iftā course. Okay, there'll be a whole section just on this itself. But you just need to make yourself familiar with it. We know in every madhab, whether it be the Hanafi, Shafi, Maliki, Hanbali, you have a hierarchical status. You have a hierarchical status of jurists. Okay, right? But the way that they've been categorized, that differs with every madhab. But don't worry about that, okay? This is just like a simplistic overview of the hierarchical status of the madhab, of the jurists within each madhab. Here we're specifically talking about the Hanafi madhab itself. So when you have the juristic status, there are generally two categories. Those who are mujtahids, independent reasoning thinkers, and those who are non-mujtahids, right? Who do not reach the level of ijtihad. Now with mujtahid, ijtihad is a spectrum. There's not only one type of mujtahid, right? You have certain mujtahids who are independent thinkers, independent mujtahids. In other words, they don't rely on other people to develop their own school. And then you have those mujtahids who operate within the confines of the madhab, but they're able to apply their own independent reasoning within the madhab itself, right? Okay, so mujtahid is an independent thinker, either outside of the madhab or inside the madhab, okay? Now you have mujtahid and mutlaq. Those are independent mujtahids, i.e. the four imams. In other words, when we say the Hanafi madhab, We don't say Hanafi madhab is because Imam Abu Hanifa is following another madhab and he's derived his own madhab. No. They are considered to be those who are the pioneers or the leading eponyms of the madhabs themselves. So the madhab have attribute to them. Who is attributing creating this hierarchy? Is this from Rasul Mufti? Yes, this is from Rasul Mufti. I've taken this from Rasul Mufti, but I've also taken them from Usul Iftā wa Adabuhu. Remember, these hierarchical cases, they are contested. Understand that these are contested, okay, right? Rasul Mufti has only presented one particular, and I'll explain to you why Ibn Abidin Shami is presented and he's preferred this hierarchical juristic case, okay? Because this itself is contested. Not everybody agrees with Ibn Abidin Shami's hierarchical juristic status, okay? This categorization. So I just mentioned Mujtahid Mutlaq, independent reasoning. Number two, then your Mujtahid fil Madhab, restricted ijtihad within the school. What that simply means is that those who practice ijtihad within the madhab themselves. In other words, that they are those who may follow the madhab in the usul, but not necessarily in the furu. They may have their own independent views in regards to certain masail. Okay, they have the independent views within certain masail, though when it comes to the usul, in the methodological principle, they may concur with them, okay? Right? Even though that it's possible that for the Mujtahid madhab, they may even disagree with certain of the usul aspects, but as a whole, they follow the usuls. Then you have Mujtahid fil Masail. They exercise ijtihad in new cases. In other words, that this is where you have those category of mujtahids that in the earlier precedents that there was a new case that which was not clearly founded by Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad. In the early three imams or the four or the five imams within the madhab, right? The founders of the madhabs, there was no clear ruling reported from them. There was no clear ruling reported from them. So now, what the other mujtahids, what they will do within the madhab, they will take the usul and the furu, and based on their understanding, they will then pass a fatwa and a ruling within the madhab of a new case based on their principles and the furu and their understanding on the methodology of the previous imams. Is that understood? Right? And sometimes what they will do, these Mujtahid fil Masail, they may revise certain cases, they may revise certain rulings and masail. They may revise certain rulings of certain masail within the madhab, and they present a different opinion. I'll give you one example. It's a simple example. Have you come across the discussion on about on how you distinguish between ma'i qaleel and ma'i kathir? In the chapter of Tahara, there's a discussion of ma'i qaleel and ma'i kathir, right? You notice that there are different opinions about how do you define ma'i qaleel and ma'i kathir, how do you distinguish between the two? You familiar with that? Yeah? You're all familiar with that, yes? No? Yeah, okay. Now, do you know that most of the people, the scholars, they give the fatwa of 10 by 10, isn't it, right? 10 by 10, right? They say that it's 10 by 10, which approximately now is about 5,000 liters, just for your information, okay, right? It's about 5,000 liters. So 10 by 10, the quantity is about 5,000 liters. So in other words, if you have a pool that's less than 5,000 liters of water, then that is my qaleel. If it's 5,000 or more, then it's kathir. Okay, just for your information, okay? Now, by the way, this 10 by 10, we give a fatwa on this, right? We follow this. Do you know that this 10 by 10 was not reported by Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad? I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. This is a new addition. This is a new opinion and a revision of how you distinguish between my qali and my kathir. But today, most scholars, most muftis, they act upon this, don't they? It makes it easy for people, right? You understand the point here, right? So this is one of those examples of ijtihad within the masail itself. Sometimes that you have to revise a certain masala and present another view, right, to make it more specific, or sometimes make it more easy for people, or sometimes it could be based on evidence. That's just an example, okay, right? So you have so that's why the masala of 10 by 10 has not been clearly, to my knowledge, has not been clearly reported by Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad, right? That this is how you do 10 by 10. It was something that was introduced within the madhab by the later Hanafi scholars. So you exercise ijtihad in new cases. Okay, right. And now this is the first three categories. Then you have the remaining categories, right? They are non-mujtahids. In other words, they are muqallids. Now, one thing to remember is this, because I have a session tomorrow on taqleed for the public. This is not part of the Balagh, but this is another um, organization that I work for. And one of the things we have to remember when you talk about taqleed has different levels. So there's a taqleed of a lay person and a taqleed of a scholar. Their level is not the same. Even within the Hanafi jurists who are not mujtahids, though they are practicing taqleed, but their taqleed is not the same as modern day scholars or modern day lay people. So even taqleed has a spectrum. You may have a muqallid who's a faqih, and then you may have a muqallid who's a complete lay person, right? And then you have things in between. That's basically this. So these are all muqallid scholars, but they're not all in the same level. So you have the muqallid Hanafis of Ashab al-Takhrij, elucidate the laws and their underpinning reasoning, able to extrapolate rulings from existing cases. Now there's a slight overlap between these two, but let me explain the difference. What Ashab al-Takhrij, what they do is that they are able to, number one, they're able to expand and explore the law. So wherever the legal ruling was, or wherever the usul was, they'll be able to comment on that. They'll be able to expand on it. And if, for example, there is a legal case, right, then what they will do, use that legal case and they will do takhrij of another new case, a new masla. Yes? You know, like, for example, when you're studying Usul Shashi, when Sahib Usul Shashi, when he mentions a ruling and they say, وَعَلَى هَذَا يُخَرَّجُ, and based on this, the ulamas have extrapolated. That's basically that. There's one particular text that we've introduced in the Iftā, and that is called Mabsut Sarakhsi. And that gives you a real good insight on how takhrij applies. So what Imam Sarakhsi, what he would do, he would mention all the masail, and then he would say, based on this mas'ala, there's another mas'ala that can be understood. There's another mas'ala that can be understood. So he will basically extrapolate another ruling based on an existing precedented case. That's called takhrij, right? And then you have tarjih wa tamyiz. Who are they? They're basically those category of jurists that whenever there are multiple views within the madhab, they are able now to distinguish and decide which view will be preferred over the other based on evidence. So for example, Sahib Hidayah, the author of Hidayah, he was of this category of Sahabu Tarjih. In other words, that based on the multiple views that there were, because obviously there's so many diverse views within the Hanafi madhab, which one do we know that is a muftabihi, which one do we act upon? That's where these Ashab al-Tarjih scholars come in. They come in and they sift through all of the opinions and they say, right now, we will do this, okay? No, that's not 𝗪𝗻𝗶𝗆. 𝗪𝗻𝗶𝗆 is a fiqh qaida. It's not based on that. It's much more than that, okay? Yeah, non-mujtahid muqallid, yes, basically. That's basically Rudy, whatever that is, okay, right? Yeah, that's it. No, that's not 𝗪𝗻𝗶𝗆, that's something else. So basically, in the Hanafi madhab, like, for example, you studied Hidayah, right? Sometimes you'll have multiple opinions within the Hanafi madhab, right? So Sahib Hidayah will decide and say, okay, now, this is the view that we're going to act upon. And he gives his reasoning. Qadi Khan, for example, Fatwa Qadi Khan, he was also on this particular view, right? He was also on this particular view, on this category, sorry, that within the Hanafi madhab, there are so many legal cases, right? There's so many opinions, sorry, not legal case, sorry, my mistake. There are so many different opinions. He will then sift through all of those different opinions and decide which of the opinion is the most strongest or the most apt or most suited to the madhab itself, all right? And they're able to differentiate between strong and weak opinion. That's another thing, because just as in hadith, we have prophetic reports and the Sahaba's reports reported through a chain, and the muhaddithin, they assess the reliability of the chain, right? You have the same thing that's applied within the madhab too. It's because we have masail that are transmitted through a chain. They won't mention the chain, but you know that masail is transmitted. But there are certain rulings that are transmitted through through a strong transmission or a weak transmission. They themselves will also be able to decide this is a weak transmission, this is a strong transmission. Okay. Then you have a restricted mufti. a restricted Mufti. Basically, a Mufti, Muqallid Mufti, profoundly learned in his madhab, mastered the Usul, Qawa'id, and Furu, Mutabahhir. Right? So in other words, you may have a senior Mufti within the madhab. He's a Muqallid, but he's very learned within the madhab. Very learned within the madhab. They not only mastered the Usul, they've mastered the Usul, they mastered the Qawa'id, they mastered the Furu, and another name is Mutabahhir. They are very profoundly learned within the madhab. If I was to give an example, I'll probably say Mufti Taqi Usmani. Mufti Taqi Usmani is probably in this category. You can have like Mufti Sayyid Palampuri, for example, Maulana Khalid Saifullah Rahmani, for example, okay? They will probably fall into this category. So they are muftis, but not like any normal Muqallid muftis. They're very profoundly learned. And this is going to be sound a bit, think you right, that Mutabahid, they are profoundly learned within the madhab. However, Maulana Shaitanwi Rahmatullahi mentions, and there are so many other conditions related to that. Again, we'll discuss all this inshallah in the Iftā, okay? Maulana Shaitanwi Rahmatullahi just mentioned though, he states that a Mutabahid Mufti, right, someone who's a Mutabahid, they have reached to such a state and such a level that even if they feel there may be one hadith that may be stronger in their view, then they can independently act upon that without giving a fatwa. Without giving a fatwa of it. When they're given a fatwa, they have to give a fatwa based on what the madhab says. But can they act upon another opinion based on their knowledge? Yes, they can. Okay? What's the reason? What are the conditions? What are the examples of that? We'll discuss that in the kitab, inshallah, when I teach you Rasm Mufti and Usul Iftā. Okay. But that's basically a restricted Mufti. And what are the limitations for that? You can do that. And then you have Hafid transmitters. So in other words, a Mufti that who's memorized the rulings without extensive comprehension of the legal rulings, they're transmitters of rulings. That's basically modern day Muftis. Right? So when you graduate from a madrasa, and you graduate from the Mufti course, and now you are teaching rulings, basically that's your state. Okay, you're a Hafid and a transmitter of the madhab. And for you to reach that level, restricted Mufti of this particular case, who's profoundly learned, that requires years of experience. Can anyone reach to these levels? Not necessarily now, because there's nothing to do anyway. He may be able to independent research on specific areas, but not as a whole though. Okay, is that clear? And Ibn Abidin Shami, he bases his principles based on the latter category. All right, we'll discuss that shortly. Why? Okay, well, in the kitab. Now, having understood, so is that clear to everybody? The hierarchical juristic status, is that all clear to everyone now, right? Is that clear to everyone? Okay, excellent. Now let's move on now. So how do we distinguish between usul, qawa'id, and furu? When we talk about usul, and this is something that a lot of students, when they join the Iftā course, they're not able to differentiate between usul and qawa'id. Okay, this is a simplistic distinction. Usul fiqh basically deals with legal theory that focuses on the Sharia sources. The primary focus for usul is the Sharia sources. It focuses on the ahkam such as fard, wajib, sunnah, haram, mu'akkad. Okay, right? So you know usul fiqh, when we talk about this is haram, makruh, fard, wajib, and so on. How do you determine something as a fard? How do you determine something as haram? How do you differentiate between haram and makruh tahrimi? How do you differentiate between makruh tahrim, makruh tanzihi? How do you differentiate between fard and a wajib? What's the ruling if a person was to deny a fard or a wajib? What's the ruling if somebody was to deny haram or makruh tahrimi? All of that falls within the domain of usul fiqh. Yes? How do we come to know that this is makruh tahrimi? Why can't we say makruh tanzihi? How do we come to know that this is makruh tahrimi? Why can't we just say it's haram? Yes, like for example, smoking, right? Somebody will say, oh, why call it makruh tahrimi? Why did you just call it haram instead? Yes, why do we just call it haram? Okay, in order to classify rulings in the appropriate categories, that's what usul fiqh comes in. Okay, hermeneutics, and interpretation of the law. So that's pronounced as hermeneutics. Okay, hermeneutics basically is the science of interpretation. So how do we interpret certain text? Okay, hermeneutics. It's a philosophical term as well. So hermeneutics and interpretation of the law. How laws are derived, how laws are extrapolated through application of qiyas. So when we have, for example, terms like khas and am, You know, like Usul fiqh, you study khas and am, right? So the first thing you study Usul Shashi is khas and am. What's what we taught? Khas is wajib al-amal. Am is wajib al-amal too, according to the Hanafi method, right? So something that's khas is wajib al-amal. So now that's hermeneutics, right? When something is khas, is qat'i, it becomes wajib al-amal. Thalas al-quru. That's hermeneutics basically, right? And how the laws are interpreted. Now you notice here, when you know that ثلاثة قروء means 3 quru, and then you notice that there are other legal implications of that, that extrapolate from that, all of that is to do with hermeneutics, hermeneutics and interpretation of law, and extrapolated rulings from the Sharia sources. Sorry, that's supposed to be from, I don't know why, from ruling from the Sharia sources. So how do we directly go to the ijma and looking at the categories of ijma? There's ijma qawli, there's ijma fi'li, there's ijma sukuti, right? And ijma has different types. There's one ijma on the theological matters. There's one ijma on the fundamentals of fiqh, for example. We know that this is haram and that's it. Zina is haram, that's it, that's ijma, right? We know that, for example, alcohol is intoxication is haram, right? That's an ijma. So ijma on certain fundamental legal rulings. And then you have ijma within the madhab. Then you have ijma within the consensus within the school itself, right? So for example, I'll give you one example. It's a consensus within the madhab that there's no Surah Fatiha behind Imam. All the Hanafi scholars, all the Hanafi jurists, Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, Imam Muhammad and others, they all unanimously agree that you don't need Surah Fatiha behind Imam. Yes, so that's an ijma consensus within the madhab itself. It doesn't mean it's consensus of the ummah, because the Shafi, Malik and Hanbali, they say you need Surah Fatiha behind Imam. Likewise, are we ordinary ulamas allowed to refuse accepting fatwas our own Mufti colleagues? Hmm. Yeah, you can. I mean, it depends on what reason. Depends on what basis, though. You see, when a Mufti is given a fatwa, it doesn't mean that you go to one Mufti, that's it. It becomes farz upon you to resort to this particular Mufti in every single matter. You just resort to somebody who you trust. Okay? But if you disagree with the Mufti, a colleague, for example, right, on a particular matter, right, then there has to be a reason for it, isn't there? Why are you doing that? Are you doing it on the basis of, now there's two ways that you, okay, so let me put in this perspective. There's a Mufti, for example, is given a fatwa, but let's say you're not a Mufti, but you don't agree with this Mufti's opinion. The first question I will ask, why is that you're disagreeing with him? It could be one of two reasons. Either you're trying to apply your independent reasoning to reject that Mufti's opinion. Okay? I would then put the counter question that what makes you qualified to come up with your independent reasoning on that basis? That's one question. Okay, right? If you're qualified enough to have a difference of view from that Mufti because you're learned and you're experienced in that field, maybe yes. Okay? Even though you may not be a Mufti, right? Or it could be the case you disagree with this Mufti's opinion is because you follow the fatwa of another Mufti who's more senior. Does that understood? If that's the case, then it's fine, it's all right. So, for example, there may be a young Mufti, but then you got a senior Mufti. You may feel that, for example, okay, this senior Mufti, he's got more experience than this Mufti. I'm going to follow this Mufti's opinion. Or it could be the reason is because you follow this fatwa Mufti's opinion is because he's learned and more experienced in this field. He is expert in medical fiqh, for example. This Mufti, on the other hand, he passes fatwa, but he's not expert in the medical fiqh, medical fiqh, for example. So I'd rather follow the fatwa of this particular Mufti, even though he may not be senior, but because he's profoundly learned within that field, his opinion may be more suited compared to this of the Mufti, right? So it depends. Now, anyways, so these are the other differences. Qawa'id al-fiqh, legal maxims derived inductively from the laws. So, you know, when you're studying Qawa'id al-fiqh, these are legal maxims. They're not legal theory. These are legal maxims that don't teach you how to interpret laws from the Quran and the Sunnah, but these are legal maxims that have been derived from the multitude of legal cases. So there are so many hundreds of thousands of legal cases. So what the fuqahas did is that they took all of those legal cases and they extrapolated certain legal maxims. So a mufti, as long as he studies the legal maxims, he's able to give a fatwa, even though if he's not memorized all of the legal rulings. Yeah? Right. And there's connection between the maxims and the subsidiary rulings. That's basically the furu'ats. And what is the furu? Furu means deal case. What happened if Qawa'id apparently goes against the usul? It depends. The thing is, Qawa'id and usul, they are two separate genres. Usul al-fiqh mainly deals with the Sharia sources. Qawa'id al-fiqh doesn't deal with Sharia sources. It deals with legal cases. Okay? I don't understand. I don't know of any example that where Qawa'id al-fiqh can potentially conflict with the Usul al-fiqh. It's because they're both separate genres anyway. Furu, basically, they are the what we call the detailed masail. Okay? Evidence of the rulings and mentioned there as well. Taught to memorize rulings found in the mutun shuruhat fatāwā. So basically, all the fiqh kitab that we study, they're all basically furu'ats. Some of them will contain evidence, some will not contain evidence. Like Hidayah, for example, okay, right? That's an example. Contains furu'ats with the dalail evidence. Quduri doesn't contain evidence, but it just contains the masail, that's all. Okay? Now, how do modern day muftis operate? So this is just my own observation and my own experience. How do we operate? Number one is attain formal authorization to practice fatwa issuance. So no mufti can now practice giving fatwas without formal authorization. He has to get authorization from his senior muftis that, okay, we give you the ijazah for you to give fatwas now. Just by graduating from the mufti course does not mean you have ijazah. Yes? Doesn't mean that. So when you do the Iftā course and you graduate, it doesn't mean that's saying that I can pass fatwas. No, there has to be formal authorization, and that happens through through experience, which I'll explain. Number two, operates within the madhab framework. Number three, profoundly learned in his madhab, right? So muftis, they operate within the madhabs. They don't do independent ijtihad. They don't decide, you know what, right? I'm going to look at all the madhabs and then I'm going to follow whichever opinion I feel right. They don't do that. Profoundly learned in his madhab. Okay, you can't just give fatwas without without you not having a real good grounding within your madhab itself. Because if you're not really familiar with your own madhab and you're not profoundly learned and educated within the madhab, you can't give a fatwa, right? I mean, and part of that is that you need to know where to research and how to research and know the different views, right? Just a couple of days ago, I just uploaded it now. There's a fatwa that I'll be working for 2 weeks, and I almost had a headache with it as well, right? Not in the negative sense. And the fatwa was interesting. I think it came from Imam of a masjid. A man gave his wife talaq, but then they reconciled and they continued living. He informed his wife that I only give you 2 talaqs. I only give you 2 divorces, right? He informed his wife that you only gave 2 divorces. So she thought, okay, 2 divorces, you could do ruju, carry on with the marriage, right? You all agree with that, yeah? 1 talaq, 2 talaq is talaq raj'i. But what happened was that he actually told somebody, the husband said, I actually gave her 3 talaqs, but I lied to her, I gave 2. He actually lied. He gave her 3. But he continued living with her, and they've had a child as well now. So now the question is, now they've separated. They're now completely separated now. They don't live together anymore now. After 2 years, they've separated. She's found out that he actually gave her 3 talaqs, but he lied to her, giving her 2. And now they've had a daughter. So the question is now, what's going to be the status of that child? Is his nasab going to be established or not? And will that child inherit from the father? Knowing the fact that he gave her 3 talaqs, but he continued living with her for 2 years and they've had a daughter. So now, when I was looking into this masla, I come to discover something quite interesting, is that establishing nasab and the laws of inheritance, they're not always the same. Yeah, they're not always the same. They differ in different matters, okay? So able to access Hanafi legal manuals, references classical legal rulings of his madhab, cannot depart from the madhab without necessity. So mufti, when they give fatwas, they don't depart from the madhab without necessity, right? And they reference classical legal rulings for his madhab. They issues verdicts on those rulings accepted and well-established opinions within the madhab. Hence, cannot give fatwa on weak opinions. Without necessity, right? He cannot independently give a fatwa on weak opinions. He has to give fatwa on the well-established opinions. Investigative approach to new cases. In other words, he has an investigative approach to new cases, right? Researching and consulting experts within the field. Like, for example, when I was doing the autistic one, I had to consult experts, and this is something that we have to do nowadays. That with modern day muftis, when you're writing on particular cases, you have to consult with experts. His fatwas are tested by senior muftis of his madhab, aware of the methodology of fatwa giving, right? There's a methodology. He's aware of how we give fatwas. Okay. Now, this is the process. I won't go into too much of the details now, but this is the general process that a mufti does when he's writing a fatwa. Okay, right? So first is the question, which is called surah. I don't know why that's F. Let me just remove that F. Okay, I don't know why that F is there. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay. You have Surat al-Masala, you fiqh al-Waqi. In other words, so this is the case. So what you have to do is you have to understand the case study itself, examine the nature of the question, what is it related to, consult experts if necessary, that is okay, right? Knowing the questioner, knowing what the question is asking, whether it's halal and haram and so on, okay, right? And then you call the taqif process. Taqif fiqh process is the legal categorization. In other words, identify the known category of fiqh ruling. In other words, is it ahkam, is it tib, is it buyu? Identifying the relevant chapters. So now this is where he has to identify the relevant chapter and clarifying whether it falls under the contract, harm, ownership, etc. Right? So understanding the characterization of the ruling, the key for fiqh. In other words, knowing the nature, okay, right? Then you have something like identifying the correct Shari ruling, okay, which is searching for the relevant juz'i masala, selecting the relevant source, and identifying the evidence or underpinning usul or juz'i ruling if necessary. So this is where he has to go into the detailed research now, okay? And then his application, tatbiq. Tatbiq is application. Now, after he's done all the research, understand the nature of the question, understand what category is about, and then now he's going into the understanding the identifying the correct legal ruling, going to the sources, finding the relevant juz'i, finds the relevant fatwa, and so on and so forth, okay, right? Then now you have to apply it, tatbiq, application of tatbiq, applying the ruling to the relevant context and case, and then writing the fatwa. Then is the writing process, okay? And then this is how you prepare the fatwa. I won't go into too much detail in that. Now, what I would like you to do is go back to the case study. Remember the first case study that we did? A person was a Shari Musafir. What you need to do is, I will do this next week, okay? I think our time is up now anyway, right? We've got unless we've got another 5 minutes. That if a person was Shari Musafir, he performed his Zuhr Salah and set off to return home. He arrived to his hometown 10 minutes before the start time of Asr. He later on realized that Zuhr that he read was not valid because he read it without wudu. It is now Asr time and now needs to, sorry, that's supposed to be, and now needs to, and now needs to read his Zuhr Qadha. How many rakats must he perform? 4 or 2. So before we answer the question, how would you break this question down? What are the certain elements related to this question? So just brainstorm. Don't give the answer, just brainstorm. Remember, this is not about giving the answer. It's about understanding the process. How would you analyze and how would you break down this question before you answer it? Okay, Safar and Salat. Okay, good. What else is there? There's another key point here. There's another key point here which I want you guys to see if you can identify. Okay, forgetfulness. What else? Can we get the case study as an assignment? Okay, you could do it as an assignment if you want. No, there's no istishab al-hal here. Muqim, time of salah. Okay, we're seeing we're on the right lines. There's another usuli discussion. is that it's the latter part. No, not asr makruh time. No, there's no makruh time. Basically, you understand the case, right? He read the Zuhr Salah Qasr. He's returned home 10 minutes before Asr starts, before Asr begins. Now, obviously, he's a Muqim, now he has to pray full Salah Asr, right? He now realized that the Zuhr that I read was the wuzu. Now he should do qada of that, but now he's already at home. So the question is now, must he do qaza of 4 rakats or 2 rakats? What you have to take into consideration here is there's another element, is that, okay, is the 10 minutes, the last 10 minutes that he had when he, so the last 10 minutes before Asr time begun when he arrived home. That itself will determine that whether he has to pray Qasr or he has to pray full Salah. You have to also take into consideration at what point did he reach home when he became a Muqim? Was it still Zohar time or was it Asr time? Yes? So he reached time within the Zohar time, and you have to also take into consideration if he's got sufficient time for him to do wuzu and to read Salah too. Yeah? So this is just like a simplistic, but I have another detailed case. But you have to look at so many other elements and so many different aspects before you come with the ruling, right? Okay. So here's a question. So let's do some reflective questions here. Muhammad, do you have a question?
Another question, but it's
Okay,
similar.
I'll comment.
Is it similar to the woman who is when a menstruation, when a
Yes,
bleeding stops, it's
yes,
closer to the time, and
yes,
then what
yes,
happens is the salat.
yes. That's another example as well, yeah? Example, right? I mean, there's so many case examples, but the purpose here is not to give the answer, but for you to understand and think. I know we're rushing it a bit, but there's much more to this. But inshallah, once you start the Iftā course, I'm going to give you some more case studies. And I'm going to give you case studies as homework as well. Don't worry about that, Samir, okay? This is just like a refresher. We go into much detail and I'm going to specifically train you how a Mufti needs to approach queries and what are the different dimensions to take into consideration. Okay, all right. Now look at some reflective questions. Is it possible for Mufti to attain level of ijtihad independent reasoning in specific cases today? What do you think? Do you think it's possible? Okay, so do you think, Brother Dawood, is it possible for a Mufti to attain ijtihad today or not? Or can we say that no Mufti can attain ijtihad? Everything has been answered. We have so many, we have the Usul, Furu, everything, right? Now, in specific cases, give an example. That's why I said I've already asked the question in specific cases. And how so? And at what capacity would he be applying ijtihad? And what capacity would he be applying ijtihad? Yes, he'd be applying ijtihad as a muqallid, so which means that sometimes you may have a muqallid, but he may apply ijtihad. This is a misconception when people say that once you're a muqallid, you cannot apply ijtihad at all. Yes? But the level of ijtihad that he applies can be a very small level. So taqleed, and this is something, one of the things that I argue, that taqleed is not an impediment to independent, it's not impediment to applying ijtihad in new cases, right? What taqleed, what it does, however, it prevents high level of ijtihad, which is not even applicable now. Okay? Now, number 3, are the doors of ijtihad open or are they closed? Discuss with reasoning. What do you guys think? Do you think, and think of it like this, I mean, mashallah, some of you are very experienced. Just think of some examples of modern day cases that you've come across or that you know of, and you think, you know what, Muftis really need to do a lot of serious research in this area. It's not just simple as giving pass fatwa, yes or no, right? Organ transplant, okay, very good. I think it's still open, okay. Give some other examples. Oh, you had organ transplant. Give me some other examples that where you will find unprecedented cases that requires mujtahid to apply all of their intellectual effort and ability within the madhab and to reach a conclusion. And that involves some level of ijtihad. Cryptocurrency. Okay, very good. Cryptocurrency. What else? Abortion. Okay. Laws of abortion. Anything else? stock markets, IVF, genetic testing, sperm mother. I've never heard of that one before. Sperm mother. Okay. Chalo, I'll take that as it is. I've never heard of it, but chalo. Mufti Sahib, I have a question in the last week's case study. In the case study, autism, the person divorced in a situation described in the case study, the situation was the same as anger. Autism was not the reason to say talaq, but the situation of his mental state was similar to post-anger. So what's your question then? It was not on the basis of anger.
So the ruling given was created other than the anger.
Yeah, it was not
Right.
based on anger. I made that very clear in the article. That, and that's something that I highlighted. That we don't base the divorce ruling on the basis of anger, but it's due to his mental capacity. Okay? But the situation of his mental state was similar to post-anger. No, then be careful with that, because the thing is, when you say that, it's giving the assumption that you're basing the ruling just on anger. It was not on the anger. Anger was just, you can say that it was a byproduct. But the real reason was because of his mental issue. Because anyone that's got mental issue, they'll be angry. You know? Okay. And is addressing modern unprecedented cases a type of applied ijtihad? I suppose, yes, it is. That's okay. Now, what I would like you to do is, based on 3 fatwa articles, these are my fatwa articles that I've written, and I want you to have a read of these and let me know your thoughts, okay? So, ruling on depressed woman emerging during Idda. So there's a case that where there was a woman who she's going through depression, and she's divorced. Her husband's given her talaq, okay, right? Now, obviously, we know that when a woman's observing idda, لا تخرجوهن من بيوتهن ولا يخرجن, right? But besides, this woman is depressed, so she's suffering from severe depression. Can she emerge from a home just for fresh air to come out during idda? And there's another ruling on Islamic ruling of fat transfer. It's a very big, it's a very common question that people are asking. So I actually got this question from Texas. Brother from Texas asked me that, can I tell my wife to apply fat transfer to enlarge certain body parts? I'm sure you know what I mean, okay, right? So I've written a detailed fatwa on this. And a ruling on consuming lab-grown meat. This is an article that I wrote many years ago. I received a question about lab-grown meat. What's the ruling on that? Is that permissible or not? So these are my articles, my fatwas and my answers. Have a read of those, and we'll have a conversation about that. So based on what we looked at, so what I want you to specifically look at with reading these cases, right? Okay. When you look at these cases, I want you to look at not just don't focus on the answer itself, but look at the fatwa process, right? And you know, this part here, we talked about this, the fatwa process, the key. See if you can try to identify these. Try to identify these within these cases, okay? Any of these, all right? Is that all right? So you know that fatwa process, apply them to these cases as well, how they applied, and then inshallah I'll explain as well, okay? So I think maybe next week what we'll do, we'll focus on the case studies themselves. We'll spend about 20 minutes focusing on the case studies, and then we'll incorporate the challenges and so on. And then the last half an hour, then we will discuss the Balagh Academy's the Iftā program, inshallah. Okay. So next week is just gonna be pure discussion now. So you know the autism, make sure you read the autism article, and these as well, these 3 fatwas. Go through them, please, as part of your homework, and we're gonna have a discussion of this purely next week on these cases, and I want you to see if you can try to identify and apply the fatwa process here, okay? And I'll give you a bit of my own personal insight when I was writing these fatwas, give you my own insight to give you a bit of an understanding, okay? Where are these fatwas posted? They're on our website, JKN Fatwa. If you see here, jknfatwa.co.uk, right? We have our own website. All of my work, my fatwas, my webinars, everything is there. Only thing I need to update is my bio. My biography, I just need to update that. Everything else, all of my work, my fatwas, my videos, my fatwa videos, my webinars, everything is all on our JKN Fatwa. Okay? Can you please share the link? Is that okay? I'll share the link here for you, okay? Right, okay, so make it easy for you. Just give me a second. So will you guys make a start on this, please? Okay, I don't want anyone coming and says I didn't get time. If you're not going to make time now, how are you going to make time for the Iftā course? So something for you to think about. So you understand the task at hand for next week? You understand what you need to? It's a simple task, okay? It's a simple task. Yes, they're all of this recording will be uploaded, the slides will be uploaded, inshallah. Okay. So are you all familiar with the task at hand? So you know the slide where it talks about how a Mufti thinks, how a Mufti operates, and the fatwa process. Just those are the two main slides. Go through those again, and then see if you can and read these fatwa cases and see if you can apply the process itself. Remember, it's just a process that we're looking at. Don't worry about the answer. Even if you don't understand the fatwa, doesn't matter, right? Just understand the process. That's what we're focusing on. And not extracting it, understanding the fatwa process, basically. Okay. Jazakallah khair. I do apologize if I've gone overboard, but I hope this was really beneficial. Inshallah, next week we will definitely try to start on time, finish on time. Okay. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.